music coming. The dark.
There you go. It is June 23rd, 2017. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast on great stations like The Gway, CKWE in Tanganyika, as well as Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. You can find our live audio stream at www.ltnradionet.com, and you'll get crystal clear audio from there. And of course, we are streaming on Facebook. If you go to Facebook Live, if you are listening and you want to check us out, you've got to go to our group page. The group page is Let's Talk Native, and you'll see that we are streaming the video and of course the audio here for the program. And we do have a program for you, so we'll get into it. I'm John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer. I'm joined by Matt Hill on the board. I've got Ed Schindler joining us, and of course off camera, off mic, I've got Jake Proud, who's shooting video for our Let's Talk Native TV channel on YouTube, and you can look for not only the Facebook video that we post here, but we end up having a little bit higher quality video that is posted on our Let's Talk Native TV channel on YouTube, and we share those links through Twitter and Facebook and the like. Our studio engineer is Kelly McMillan. I want to thank her for her help with our setup and what gets us going, I guess. Look, as you may know, last week I debuted our use of our new camera, the Mevo, which was not a very successful trial run. Part of the whole thing is we do not have great internet connection here on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We are making some adjustments for next week. So right now I am streaming basically on my cell phone, as I have done, and that's why this works. The video quality sometimes suffers, but it does work, and we'll use this until we get our internet strength where it needs to be, which is probably going to be next week. So you will see a change. We'll go back to the Mevo device probably by the end of next week. If I don't know if we'll get it done for Monday. I did use it though in New York, where we do not suffer from internet failure, and it worked pretty good. I still got some schooling to figure out how to use some of what they call the autopilot feature. But if you want to check that out, I've got that posted on Let's Talk Native group page and the Let's Talk with John Kane on WBAI group page. You can find that video, and I'll tell you, the video is, it bounces around a little bit because of me figuring out how the controls work, but the audio is superb. So by all means, we can you can check out and see what the potential is, and we'll do better with that. And we will, like I said, by the end of next week, we'll be in a situation where we'll be using that Mevo device here to increase the quality of our of the video experience that we're trying to produce here. All right, so why did I start the program with Logan Stats, the taxman's coming?
Because he is.
Because he is. Look, we go through this every couple. Usually, it's like on a 7-year cycle. And
like Locust, huh?
No, it's amazing because it was about 2010. When we did battle them last time, when they shut off the wholesalers. Now I'm talking about New York State, of course, here, but we're heading into a battle with New York State over taxation again, and they are once again ramping up to try to fight us over the taxation on the sales of tobacco products here on Native territories. And I've got the proposed bill. It was submitted on May 1st. And by a Republican, Martin Golden. Isn't it ironic that these guys have names associated with money and wealth? Martin Golden. And here's the crazy part. This guy is a state senator from the 22nd Senate District, which is Brooklyn.
I'm dying again.
there's no native people in Brooklyn except for the Mohawks or the native people who do high steel and that kind of stuff. But there's no. I mean, so why of anybody in the state? Why is there a guy from New York City trying to push this bill through? And, and this guy's been on the wrong side of a lot of issues like the gay marriage issue and a bunch of other stuff. But so Martin Golden, know the name, remember the name, because I'll be bashing him quite a bit as we go forward. But here's the thing. They're trying to make it very, very clear through a piece of legislation that they can require a tax stamp on all the product that's on our territories. Now, they've made this claim before. The fact that they're trying to, again, codify it into state law kind of proves that they were lying in the past, right? Everything, all their claims about having this taxing authority, then why are you changing the language now? See, just so people understand. When we first started selling tobacco products on our native territories, we bought from New York State wholesalers. We didn't
quite a while too.
Yeah, for many years. In fact, some of these New York wholesalers turned into major companies with many employees, and they, of course, they were still servicing, the 7-Elevens, the Wilson Farms, all these other, Walmart, whoever. They were servicing all of the other tobacco wholesalers, but they're also servicing native territories. The difference is they were not affixing a state stamp to the product that came to our territories. Why? Because there was no requirement by law to do so. And in fact, the state did not have the ability to tax product that came to our territories. The states fought like hell over the years to try to squeeze the wholesalers so they could no longer sell to us without a stamp on it. And I think it was about around 2010 that they finally were able to push it through. During the Pataki administration, well, let me back that. During the first Cuomo administration, Mario Cuomo, he actually proposed this idea of shutting off the wholesalers. It got into a battle where the Atias, who are one of the major wholesalers here in Western New York, challenged the state's ability to force them to tax us. And they challenged it based on what they had from the federal government, which was called the Federal Indian Traders License. And they argued that their Federal Indian Traders License superseded state law. And they lost in court, they won in court. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So at the Supreme Court level, they determined that the claim that Atia was making, that their Federal Indian Traders License superseded state law, they ruled against Atia. Now, understand what was at stake there. This was a non-native wholesaler who was just selling to us. They challenged, because they had a Federal Indian Traders License, a license from the federal government to do business with us, that the state could not interfere. Now, they had some case law on their side. The way they lost, though, is the U.S. attorney made the argument that there are territories out west, not our territories here, not here in New York, and not under the New York State authority over their wholesalers, but in other places, like Colville Reservation, and in Arizona, and other places. There were like 3 cases that they cite where the courts upheld the state's right to impose a minimum burden on tribal governments to collect taxes on tobacco. Now, part of that whole argument and the reason they were successful has to do with the status of the lands that they were talking about. They looked at the fact that these lands were checkerboarded. And by checkerboarded, meaning there was no distinct border that you crossed onto. So when you left, the state of Montana or whatever, that you ended up that you were on native lands. The line was not that clear because of the allotment process. All of that Dawes Act stuff, where parcels, portions of land were sold off. So the municipal services were being provided by the state or the municipalities in the area, not necessarily by the native territories. It was very hard to tell when you were on or when you were off what was considered native lands. So all of those things considered, the courts ruled in a couple of these cases, again, out west, not here, that the states could impose a minimum burden on tribes to collect taxes. So based on those rulings, the Supreme Court said, well, if the states could impose a minimum burden on tribes themselves, then clearly a wholesaler, just by virtue of a federal Indian trader's license, could not supersede state law. So ATIA lost, but it was very clear that was a facial challenge. It had nothing to do with the sovereignty of of our territories. It just had to do with whether a New York State wholesaler, who also was operating under a federal license, not just a state license, could supersede state law. So that's what was ruled on in ATIA. Now the interesting thing is, they made it very clear that was not that ruling had nothing to do with sovereignty, didn't address any of this stuff. But there was language in it in the ruling, and some of the language in that ruling did talk about things like the difference between imposing a tax on a product that was only coming onto our territories from a taxable environment, to avoid tax payment, so we could sell it back to a people that the state or the federal government claims is taxable. Their people. So in other words, if we're buying product like Marlboro, Philip Morris products, or Lorillard products, Newports, or whatever, buying them, bringing them onto our territory only to sell it to people, they said that's different. That's the idea of taxing, because of what they were suggesting is that was just tax that was going to be passed along to the consumer. That was the argument in a TIA, so to speak. But they made it very, very clear in that ruling that the idea of taxing a product that only came on to avoid taxes or for resale was on what they said on markedly different ground than a product that we add value to, that we manufacture, that we have some input with. So if we manufacture a product, or if we develop a brand, or if we, whatever value added portion of that product we added to it, that's a different story than just buying a product. So the argument for native brands was clearly in a completely different place than a product that we were simply just buying from a New York State wholesaler manufactured as a national or premium brand. That was laid out in 1991 in the ATIA case. There was no question about that. The language is very, very clear. So I want to put that out there. Now, here's the other issue, the problem with the ATIA ruling. They made it sound like if we were selling product to a non-native, that non-native was taxable. And here's the problem with that. According to New York State law, a New York State resident can purchase up to 2 cartons of cigarettes anywhere. Russia, Canada, Venezuela, in another state. They could purchase from Virginia. They could purchase from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Vermont, any place, and bring up to 2 cartons of cigarettes into New York State and be tax exempt from New York State taxes. So, in fact, they have a form that says if you buy a taxable product like tobacco, if you buy tobacco and you bring it into New York State, you must fill out a form called CG15, which is a form that you fill out, and then you remit what now is not a sales tax, it's considered a use tax because you already bought it, right? So now you're bringing it into New York State for use tax. But it's very, very clear that if it's 2 cartons or less, that product you brought into New York State is exempt. So the idea that the state would suggest that us here on our territory selling up to 2 cartons to a New York State resident, they're going to say that's taxable, even though Pennsylvania can do it. I mean, without New York State tax. So they miss that whole exemption that New York State has in their law. Now, look, we're not saying that we make non-native people tax exempt. All we've ever said is that we aren't the tax collectors for New York State. Our sales are not taxable. Now, the use and consumption of a product in New York State may be taxable. That's not for us to decide. But their laws, in terms of use and consumption, say that if it's 2 cartons or less, then it's not taxable. Now, whether it's enforceable or all that other stuff, I mean, it's kind of an honor system. If you bring tobacco in New York State, you're supposed to fill out this form. Does anybody do it? Who knows? There's even a place, I think, on the New York State income tax form to remit taxes, like for mail order. There's certain things that if you order from mail order, you're supposed to remit New York State tax. Does anybody do it? Who knows? But if they do, then congratulations, New York. You got money for nothing, essentially. All right, so I said all this to bring us to the conversation at hand now. So this state senator from Brooklyn, Martin Golden, has submitted a new law, which is really just old legislation that just keeps being recycled. Now, he's a Republican, and it's a Republican-controlled state legislature, so that helps him. But the reality is, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican. They've always put crosshairs on us when it comes to taxation. And part of it is about scapegoating. And here's what I want to say about that. The Tax Foundation and a few other organizations, and an organization working with the Tax Foundation, made an assessment a few years ago. I've talked about it on the show. They made an assessment a few years ago that 60% of all of I think it's actually 57, but close to 60% of all tobacco consumed in New York State, they determined, is smuggled. It's smuggled in. I called those folks, and I talked to some of the folks. I says, when you say smuggled, are you even talking about native sales? Because we don't smuggle. We sell wide open here. We're not smugglers. And they said, no, this is just product that New York State, the people go to cheaper states, Virginia, North Carolina, or whatever else, and bring it in and they sell it. And New York City is where it's the worst, because not only do you have $47 worth of taxes associated with a carton of cigarettes, plus the sales tax, that's just excise tax, associated with tobacco in New York State. In New York City, they throw another $15 per carton on top of that. So it's over $60 worth of tax. I mean, plus 8% sales tax on top of that. So it's very expensive to buy a carton of cigarettes in New York City. It's like a carton of cigarettes in around here off territory is like $70 or $80 or something like that. If you buy it at a drugstore, if you go to Rite Aid or one of these places that whose job it is to provide healthy stuff like cigarettes, you're gonna pay $70, $80. In New York City, you're gonna throw another $15 on top of that. So I mean, that's how expensive it is. So clearly, it doesn't make sense for people to buy cigarettes in New York State under that tax scheme. That's why we have success with our tobacco, and that's why other states, if you drive down 81 from below Syracuse and Binghamton, as soon as you cross into Pennsylvania, there's like 4, 5, 6, or maybe even a dozen.
There's even a Smokin' Joe's there.
Yeah, they have smoke shops in Pennsylvania, right off the interstate.
It's not Tuscarora Smokin' Joe.
No,
it's different Joe.
It's just their name. They just call it Smokin' Joe's. Yeah, they've got smoke shops in Pennsylvania, right off the interstate, just south of the state line. Now, why do you suppose they're there? Who do you think they're selling cigarettes to? They're not in the heartland of Pennsylvania. They're just they're border stores. They're clearly there to sell product to people about to cross into New York State. That's from a positioning standpoint, that's what they're there for. And there's at least a half a dozen of them. And they sell, all kinds of stuff, but they sell cigarettes. So, I mean, the other states have taken advantage of this thing. And of course, in New York City, you can go into any, what they call them bodega, any bar, any place essentially, and you can find cigarettes. They call them Lucy's because they're you can buy just a cigarette. Eric Garner in Staten Island was choked out by the New York City police because they were alleging that he was selling cigarettes. Now he had he had been busted, I guess, for selling cigarettes before. In fact, they took thousands of dollars away from him, and some of that stuff was pending in court. On the day they decided to choke him to death, he wasn't actually selling cigarettes. He had busted up a fight. Somebody called the cops. The cops were there, and they said, "Well, it's this guy again. We'll just harass him some more." And and he's a big guy. They ganged up on him and they choked him to death. It is really the classic example of a life being taken over cigarette tax. Literally, somebody being killed over New York State cigarette tax.
He had one of the strongest quotes I've heard in that case. Remember, you're standing there saying, "It stops today."
Yeah,
that was his. I mean, I thought that was a stronger statement.
And ironic. I mean, he was tired of the harassment because they were harassing all the time, and that's literally what Eric Garner said before they choked him out. He goes, "It stops today." And those were, prophetic words,
that ended in
unfortunately.
a different way for him.
Yeah, I mean, it did stop that day because they killed him. They didn't shoot him. This wasn't a cop with an itchy trigger finger. This was a cop who performed an illegal a chokehold that is prohibited by New York City police, by the New York City police, and they choked him to death. I mean, they killed this guy over cigarette tax. I mean, they say, well, he was conducting illicit sales. No, let's be clear what it is. He was killed over taxes. He was killed for avoiding New York State taxes.
And that's allegedly.
Well, no, that's why they killed him. Whether he was actually doing it or not, there's no question why they killed him. They killed him over taxes. Now, whether at that time he wasn't really engaged in the activity, he had just broken up a fight. And then he was loved in his neighborhood, not because he was the cheap cigarette guy. He was just he was an imposing figure. He was a guy that everybody loved in the neighborhood, except for those police officers. So I wanted to, that kind of sets more of the stage. So here's what is being proposed. It's this whole idea that they're going to change some of their laws, because when in 2010, when let me back up. Part of the problem that Mario Cuomo faced was they had no means to make sure that the tobacco that was being sold to our territories, they couldn't really tax our use. What the TIA acknowledged and what the federal courts have always acknowledged is that we have the right to buy tobacco or products without paying tax on it. So, of course, we use in the development of this tobacco business, we use our ability to buy without taxes to create retail here. The state's position was we may be able to consume without paying taxes, but anybody we sell to can't. That's the state's position, and we'll get into that a little bit more as the show goes on. But so that's basically the state's position. So in order for them to say, okay, all the product that comes onto our territory has to be stamped. Well, how do you deal with the fact that we, as consumers, don't have to pay taxes? So they didn't have a system in place, and that's why Mario Cuomo was never able to implement this thing. And of course, it didn't get implemented during. Pataki had done some saber rattling in '97. We had some knockdown dragouts with state police over this, and frankly, George Pataki backed off, and he said, you know what? I'm the chief executive of this state, and I'm not going to enforce state regulations as it relates to tobacco and fuel sales. And he didn't. Then he stops running, essentially, and he had served several terms after. It didn't cost him anything politically. But then Elliot Spitzer, the sheriff of Wall Street, isn't that what they call him, or the marshal, or what do they call him? Something like I don't know. He had this big New York State Attorney General, right? No, I know you're gonna say whoremonger, but I don't know. He ended up getting he had to resign in shame because of a prostitution scandal that he was associated with. What was he? What was his number? Wasn't he something like? They gave him a certain number. He was like the 19 or something, or 17. He was the client number such and such or something like that. Yeah, that's what they call him. Client 17. Was it client number 9? Okay, that's what. Yeah, client number 9. Yeah. So Elliot Spitzer, I don't know. He may still be client number 9, but he wasn't the governor anymore. But he came in like all governors do. They come in with this idea that they're gonna be tough with Native people, right? So he never got a chance to get tough with us because he got busted with a prostitute. So his replacement, which was David Patterson, came in, and he started making some progress towards implementing this. And it was during the Patterson administration that they finally shut off the wholesalers. And then what they did is they came up with this coupon scheme where they said, I don't even know if anybody really used it, but somehow the wholesalers would have to pay the taxes, and they would be reimbursed with some sort of coupon process for what they sold to native territories. They could be issued a coupon and turn that coupon into state. So it would made it more burdensome for the wholesalers. Now, we didn't have to pay it and get reimbursed, but they were saying that the wholesalers could. this new law is doing away with that system. That's one of the features of this new law that they're pitching. And I don't know. I think I got a bill number here. What's it called? I don't even. It says 5789 is on the top of the bill. So that yeah. So it's S 5789 if you want to look it up. That's it's a bill introduced by Senator Golden from Brooklyn. So it's to do away with the coupon program. We're at the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to take a break. And I want to talk about how they're going to get around this whole tax thing. It's pretty incredible, and there's just tremendous arrogance and assumption associated with this. But we'll talk about it more when we come back from break. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
European nations.
The story's told with lies. The treaty signed.
The founding of this country, the U.S. government has made and broken over 500 treaties with various Indian tribes all across our nation.
War was lost. The treaty signed. I had to leave my life behind. I'll live among you, well disguised. I had a name, but never mind.
Broke over 500 treaties.
They were unilateral agreements between two sovereigns, meaning that it was indigenous people here and the U.S. government, and it was equal. We still retain that. The other way that it's supported and retained, even though the U.S. government refuses sometimes to recognize that, and maybe these younger people that are listening to this can change this, because this is about healing. It's about forgiving. Do you know what the 6th article of the U.S. Constitution is? That treaties are the supreme law of the land. It actually says that in the U.S. Constitution. Treaties are the supreme law of the land.
The treaty signed. The treaty signed. The truth that died. The treaty signed. The treaty signed. The truth that died. You serve them well. I'm not surprised. You're of their kin. You're of their kind. You serve them well. I'm not surprised.
500 treaties.
I had a name, but never mind.
Well, it turns out the problem with treaties.
All right. Hey, that's a little bit of Frank Wan, right? Yeah, Frank Wan. Yeah. What's that? What's this one?
Treaties.
The treaties. There you go. Whatever they're worth. That's a whole nother. That's another show. All right. So here we are with this new piece of legislation, which is just kind of recycled legislation. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to change how. Here's the bottom line. They're trying to eliminate our regulatory advantage, first off, because we sell a carton of native brands here for, I don't know, what are they coming in at, like a $30 or something like that, where the premium brands that are being sold off territory are $70, $80, $90. That's how much they cost. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of territories that are selling premium brands anymore because I'm not even sure. They've got to be creative on where they get them from, because they can't get them from New York State wholesalers, so they get them from out of state. So here's what the state's trying to propose. First off, they're trying to make it clear that anybody selling into New York State, including onto a native territory, has to be a licensed wholesaler. So the fact that we've already got native wholesalers on our territories, we're never going to get a New York State license. And what they're saying is every carton of cigarettes in New York State, including on our territories, because they're trying to claim that our territories, and this is where this is the battle that we've talked about with Matt and over speeding tickets, and we've talked about this whole issue about is our land in New York State. And of course, you know what our position is. Our position is not only is our land not part of New York State, that it's not even part of the United States. And we have language in their treaties, in their law, in their own acknowledgments that support that. But here we are in 2017, where you've got New York State saying that anybody selling to us, even if we're selling to us, that we somehow have to be registered. We have to become licensed wholesalers of New York State, which is so absurd. And so what they're saying is that all of the product that we sell specifically has to have a New York State stamp on it. Now here's what they've done. I mean, this is the part that just this is how they think they get around this. For one thing, I didn't even get to the section about what we buy, but what they're saying is when we sell a product that they have to have a New York State stamp on it, and the tax is due, the tax from our sales is the same as the tax off our territories, except if there's a tribal tax. So if, let's say, the Seneca Nation says we're going to tax it, a couple of bucks. The Seneca Nation is going to create a revenue stream from the sale, specifically from the sale of tobacco on our territories. They're saying you can subtract that from the state the state tax, and so we'll pay it up front, and of course charge a consumer that price, and the state will reimburse us. So the state will have a complete record of every sale, because there would have to be this burdensome process of being reimbursed. Now, what they said is, depending on the size of that tax, I mean, let's say the Seneca Nation, for instance, let's say they want to tax it $47, like New York State.
That's going to happen.
Yeah, like that's going to happen, right? Or say they want to tax it $60. What they're saying is, if the state tax minus the tribal tax is still a positive number, then there's a difference. The state will only charge us or will reimburse us up to the amount of the tax. So the whole point is nothing higher than New York State tax will be imposed by New York State. Now, if the Seneca Nation decides to tax higher, then the full amount of that New York State tax will be reimbursed. I mean, it's a ridiculous system. But what it comes down to is not only this whole idea of 2 cartons, per New York State resident. The assumption that the state is making, and this guy in particular, this Martin Golden is making, is that the state has the authority to do this on our territories. Now, I hate quoting the Canandaigua Treaty, because I think most of these treaties are fraud. But you have to understand the language that was acknowledged by the federal government in Canandaigua. The language in the Canandaigua Treaty that was written by George Washington's folks clearly acknowledged that the lands that we resided in, the lands that we retained even after that treaty, and forever the lands that we retained are not part of New York State. They are not part of the United States. That's what they said. We acknowledge that the land is yours, and the United States will never claim the same unless you choose to sell. So to the extent that our lands have been whittled down through many fraudulent sales and that kind of stuff, the lands that have been whittled down, according to the Canandaigua Treaty and subsequent acknowledgments by the federal and the state government, the lands that we have here are not part of New York State. They are not part of the United States. That's their language. We agree with that. We assert that. But they've acknowledged that. They've always acknowledged it. They've acknowledged it forever. In spite of doctrine of Christian discovery and all that nonsense that came out of the Supreme Court in the Marshall Court in the Cherokee trilogy of cases, there's no question. I mean, in fact, when you think about those cases led up to the Removal Act, in the 1830s, when the Trails of Tears were happening, the federal government tried to get the Senecas, all of the Haudenosaunee, to leave, and they offered land to the Senecas in Kansas, and the Senecas said, "Well, what about this land in Kansas? How would that title be squared away?" And they said, "Well, that land would be yours." And it would be just as the land you're on now is yours. And the United States would never. So then in 1830, they were still acknowledging that if the Senecas, that not only did the land the Senecas were on was theirs, was the Seneca land, and of course the other Haudenosaunee territories, that the United States couldn't claim it unless the Senecas made a deal. And when they offered to put them on other lands in Kansas, the federal government had to tell the Senecas that land would be yours just as the land in your homeland has been yours, and that the United States will never claim it. So that's 1830. You can go all the way up through, again, when you talk about the 14th Amendment, which was 1868, 14th Amendment, which was supposed to get the United States out of their, solve their slave problem, right? Because they were finally going to acknowledge that slaves, the black people, were U.S. citizens. That they were full. You were not 3/5 of a man, but they were full U.S. Anybody that said born in the United States and under the jurisdiction of the United States were here, but were citizens of the United States. Now, that language, born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, were citizens. We were neither. We were neither born in the United States because we were essentially living on our lands, and we were not subject to their jurisdiction. How do we know that? Because 50 years later, they would try to pass the Indian Citizenship Act, which would finally try to claim and declare that we were U.S. citizens, because we weren't U.S. citizens in 1968. Or through the 19th century. It wasn't until the 20th century, till 1924, that they would try to solve the Indian problem by making us U.S. citizens. Of course, that's illegal. It's actually a war crime to denationalize people. It was acknowledged by international law that the idea of not only stripping citizenship away, but then replacing their citizenship with yours, that's a war crime. I mean, and that's been acknowledged, throughout the world. So it is really clear, and it has always been clear, regardless of the debate over conquest in general. There's this sense that people try to suggest that that Native people were conquered by the United States. Didn't happen. It never happened. Didn't happen anywhere. But that's wrong. But beyond that being wrong, the United States has been forced, bound by their own sensibilities of law, which sometimes aren't very sensible when you consider things like doctrine of discovery and other things, that they could not make a justifiable, legitimate legal claim that we were part of the United States, that our territories were part of So in 1924, when they passed the Citizenship Act, there's actually a provision at the very end that said nothing in this act shall deprive a Native person of their what they call tribal rights. So, which if that gets ignored. I mean, to suggest that our lands after 1924 became part of the United States, it's wrong. It even violates the provision of that law. But it's illegal to do that anyway. So there's no question that our lands were neither part of the New York State or the United States, and there's no place in history that the United States or New York State can claim that they became theirs. Now, I know there's this whole U.S. 232 and 233, a federal statute that was passed to allow the states to exercise civil and criminal jurisdiction on territories. But again, we never consented to that.
I challenged that. That's part of what I used in my argument.
That's exactly what you challenged in over a speeding ticket.
And they couldn't make a ruling on it anyway because it wasn't their. They were too low of a court.
That's not true. They could have, but they opted not to. They just dismissed the whole thing instead of acknowledging it. And that's one of the problems, because when the courts are wrong, they just dismiss a case. They won't rule in our favor. So there never ends up being the legal precedent that we need. So as I read through this, basically I'm only going through the first couple of pages on this thing, but it's already so categorically wrong. Now, and you had a little bit of, in fact, I think you had more of a chance to look through it than I did. Yeah. I mean, what the state is asserting is that first off, that they have the right to do this. Mm-hmm. And, it's problematic even when you get into the mechanics of it. But first and foremost, the biggest problem is that they have no legal basis to even do this thing.
Yeah, they had to insert parts where they literally defined our people, and they labeled us as part of the state of New York. And that became a real big issue, because we're not. And especially the land, but neither the land nor the people, okay, are legally bound to be part of the state of New York or U.S.
Well, and even here's where how wrong they were, even with their alleged coupon. This is when you talk about what they considered their authority. I mean, there's been an acknowledgement that they can't tax us, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why they were trying to pre-collect the tax from New York State wholesalers. So they knew they couldn't do that. But here's what they're trying to say. They were actually trying to create a quota system based on the population of the Seneca Territory or Mohawk Territory or whatever else. But here's the thing. What they were claiming is that only Senecas who lived on Seneca Territory could buy a carton of cigarettes without New York State stamp on it. So the fact that I'm Mohawk or my wife's Oneida, or the fact that there are non-native people who live in our territories, it gets into this issue that you talk about as it relates to Salamanca. The question isn't whether I am taxable or whether a non-native who lives on territory is taxable. The question is, can they impose that tax on the land, on the territory? Mm-hmm. So I would argue that anybody who comes to a Seneca venue or who lives here, I don't care if you're Seneca, if you're Mohawk, if you're Apache, Ojibwe, whatever, or if you're white. If you're consuming that product here, you've not entered that product into New York State's jurisdiction.
Look at a scenario. If you're coming, say from Canada, and you're smoking Seneca cigarettes, which are manufactured up there. I don't know if they got the same Senecas up there or not, but you come to a lacrosse game for the weekend. So you come to our territory here, and you're smoking there, they could essentially tax you for those cigarettes.
Well, that's the claim they're trying to make.
Yeah, even though we were two different native territories, they can still they still want to put their arm in there. That doesn't make sense at all.
No, I mean, and in fact, let's say somebody from Pennsylvania comes in. Does New York State have a right to collect a sales tax from somebody who's not a resident or not going to use and consume that product in New York State?
But already no, because you're allowed 2 cartons of cigarettes.
But see, they're not acknowledging that we have a right to sell those 2 cartons of cigarettes. That's the whole point. The point is they acknowledge that in Pennsylvania you can go there and buy 2 cartons of cigarettes without a New York State stamp on it. But what they're completely trying to ignore is that 2 carton limit, which really makes it legal for any consumer in New York State to take a carton of cigarettes in New York State or 2 and consume them. But they're not. I mean, so when they come up with this quota system, to me, well, the quota system has to be that everybody in New York State has the right to go onto our territories to buy a carton of cigarettes. They can't just say, well, only the Senecas. I mean, you take a place like Tonawanda, 50% of the people who live in Tonawanda aren't even native, and only 50% of the native population are Tonawanda Senecas. So this is how. I mean, if in Salamanca, for instance, the city of Salamanca. Mm-hmm. Those people live on Seneca land. I understand there's this unique situation with the congressional village thing, but why, if it's not part of New York State, even if it does have some sort of municipal standing within the federal government or whatever else, why should anybody there have to pay New York State stamp tax? It's on native lands. If the product is being consumed on our territories, regardless of whether we're native or non-native or Seneca or non-Seneca, the state should not have or if you're going to consume that product in another state or another country, why would New York State, how could they possibly make the argument that they have the right to collect a tax on a sale that we make here to somebody who is not going to consume it in New York State? Now, and my point is, you can make that claim to your New York State residents. Once they leave our territory and go home, you can do whatever you want to them. That's between them and you, not between us. But the fact of the matter is, you've already given a 2 carton allowance. That's in your law. Your New York State law says that up to 2 cartons of cigarettes can be entered into New York State for use and consumption without tax on it. But they're ignoring that completely in this thing. In fact, what they're saying is that you have to pay New York State everybody. Now, this is also going to include native brands, and here's the problem with that. Native brands can't be sold by really by New York State wholesalers anymore, and so the idea our wholesalers are never going to become New York State wholesalers. So the idea that the state thinks that they not only can make our retail stores charge the same amount for sales for a product by imposing their tax, or or encouraging native territories to create a tax that's equivalent to theirs. But now they're saying we're going to destroy the retail market, but we're also going to destroy the wholesale market, because none of your wholesalers are going to be able to stay in business, because we're only New York State wholesalers can they're going to say that only New York State wholesalers can sell to our territories, even though we've created an entire economy of manufactured goods, of wholesale, of distribution, marketing. We've got marketing teams associated with, we've got manufacturers, reps that go into territories to set up at smoke shops. There's a whole business that this moron in Brooklyn has no idea even exists. Now, I know in Brooklyn they can sit there and say, oh, yeah, but there's this, we got these territories out in Long Island. Look, what you're not acknowledging here, and this gets back to the Tax Foundation's analysis, the smuggled cigarettes in New York State are not from our territories. They're not from Shinnecock and Puspatuck. They aren't from Seneca or Oneida or Onondaga. They are from the average guy who is so fed up with the New York State taxing scheme that, and frankly, because the New York State taxing scheme is so oppressive, you've created an underground market with it. And when you're talking about $60 worth of tax on a cigarette, on a carton of cigarettes, 60 or, well, actually more than that, but when you talk about sales tax, so $70 or $80 worth of tax on a carton of cigarettes.
And that's just one carton.
That's just one carton. So a guy can go to Virginia, spend $500 or $600 on tobacco, come home and sell them one cigarette at a time, and make that money back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they can and make a pretty good income, and that's what they do. You can go into every bar, many restaurants, many street corners, and you can find somebody who's selling unstamped cigarettes. It isn't native people. We are not selling. I mean, I'm not saying that some of those people may go to a native territory to buy some of this product, but you know what? They can buy it cheaper going to Virginia. Most of the product that is being sold in the street corners of New York City are not even coming from Long Island. I would say the folks that are going out to Long Island who are buying large amounts are usually buying for a group of people. I don't know for sure. I mean, and is it more than the two carton sales? Sure. But you know what? We have the right to conduct sales. It's on you to figure out how you're gonna tax your people. That's not our problem. And the idea that you're gonna try to falsify the authority that you have and fake it and assume. Look, we're heading into a major conflict with New York State if they try to push this thing through. Mm-hmm. Now, and here's the problem. This is a Republican. They've got a Republican-controlled legislature. But you know what? The Democrats have been more oppressive over these. George Pataki is the guy who pushed back against the Democrats and the Republicans in the legislature and said, no, I'm not gonna tax the native people. They've had their own economy, and that's what it is. But that's not the position that Andrew Cuomo's taken. I mean, frankly, even Mario Cuomo, except for the fact that he assembled this whole idea of pre-collecting the tax by making New York State wholesalers, put stamps on all products, which never happened. I mean, he had that case, it was his case that the Atias or legislation that the Atias were fighting against. But it didn't happen during Mario Cuomo's watch. It didn't happen during George Pataki's watch. It happened during David Patterson and during his administration. And this governor has lied to their people. I mean, when they first were really pressing this tax issue, they were throwing, I think the first figure, I saw $130 million that Andrew Cuomo had put into one of his first budgets that he said he was going to get from sales on native territories. $130 million. and nobody even knew where that number came from. Of course, it never happened. Here's what did happen, though. Because we stopped buying premium brands, the state ended up shooting themselves in the foot on Master Settlement Act payments. Because all the premium brands, they have to pay into a Master Settlement Agreement that goes back to the state. Smaller manufacturers have to escrow money But the main manufacturers, the premium brands like Marlboro and Newports, Camels, the R.J. Reynolds, the Philip Morris, the Lorillard, all of those companies have to charge more for their product and then pay it back to the state. When we stopped carrying that stuff, and here's the sad part is during Pataki's administration, he actually borrowed against future Master Settlement Act payments, and then the state was so weak-kneed in how because they had to fight the major manufacturers, the big tobacco, because big tobacco says, well, we're not going to pay this Master Settlement payments to you anymore because you're not enforcing your state law on native tobacco. Again, everybody used us as a scapegoat. 60%, 57, 58% of the sales or consumption of alcohol or tobacco in New York State is product that the state collects no tax from. It's product that's coming in from other states. We represent a small, almost a minuscule portion of sales that the state feels like they're missing out on sales tax over. And they are missing out. Our sales are our sales. And in fact, the other place that they shot themselves in the foot was over the remote sales, the mail order. When we were doing mail order cigarettes here on especially in Seneca territory, we were selling product all over the country, all over the world for that matter. And you know what? Every carton of Marlboro that somebody ordered from from a remote sales, whether it was mail order or however you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, New York State was getting a Master Settlement Act payment for that. They were getting paid. They were living large because they were getting Master Settlement Act for payments for product that was not being consumed in their market. So California, all these other states, we were buying them here. That's where the sales from the wholesaler is what the Master Settlement Act, not where the product is consumed. So the state screwed themselves with the Master Settlement Act. They screwed themselves by essentially shutting down wholesalers. When the wholesalers couldn't sell to us, many of them went out of business.
Plus all the other supporting businesses too. That UPS had to scale back.
We were using UPS and FedEx and the post office. All of those parcel delivery services were making millions of dollars. And they're local people. It's the guy in the brown shorts showing up at your shop. These guys are making a living off of this stuff. Now you've got a U.S. Post Office that is pretty much bellying up, and every couple of years we hear how bad they're doing. Well, maybe you shouldn't have deprived them of their of the right to be a parcel service for us.
Millions of fresh interstate money coming into the area just dried up.
Well, and that's the other thing is, and you make a good point. It's not just about the Master Settlement Act payments that came into New York State, but the dollars that came into New York State all got spent. We don't have the commercial infrastructure in our territories. The dollars that come into our territory, whether it's gaming dollars or tobacco dollars, it gets spent back into the immediate economy. That mall up there by Akwesasne, is pretty much out of business.
Look at McKinley Mall.
Well, McKinley Mall, the success of McKinley Mall was attributed to the amount of jobs that we created here, and the affluence that was coming out of that tobacco. But ever since that shut down, McKinley Mall's been been going into the toilet. And same with St. Lawrence Mall or whatever it is, the one up in near Akwesasne. It's impact that goes beyond just, they think they can target us and they can put crosshairs on us. But I got to tell you, this has the potential to break it all down again. I'm talking about thruway closures, railway closures, all that stuff has the potential to get ugly. Yep.
I just wanted to make the point, that this is more than just cigarettes. I know there's going to be somebody out there that's going to say, well, you guys are just protecting the cigarette retailers, and that's not true. This is one aspect that can cause a domino effect across the board. This is if they can knock down the cigarettes, they can knock down any kind of business, any kind of retail that we want to.
This is about New York State asserting authority.
Yeah, and we can't. That's why it's important to fight this, that's why I went up against the traffic situation.
Mm-hmm. This really has a potential to go very badly.
I think it's important to take a look at something besides cigarettes and gasoline, and that's what we have, which is unique, and that's land. And right now, we don't have to pay property tax for land because it's our territory, it's our home. We don't have to pay that. But
let's word this properly. It's not that we don't have to pay. Nobody has the authority to tax our lands, and I think it's important that we use the right. Yeah, we're not taxable.
We're non-taxable.
Right.
Okay, and people don't realize that if the state were to push this through, it doesn't bring just that cigarette tax. It brings the right to tax into the hands of the state of New York.
Well, and it's even more than tax, though. It's about the state asserting regulatory authority in general,
and jurisdiction.
The jurisdictional issues. The state is a bureaucratic nightmare, and we've always been able to push them at bay. I'll tell you, the IGRA opened the door for the state to come into our territories in terms of gaming, but that was the only place that, and the only reason we allowed that, frankly, is because we needed those vendors that had to be approved. It had less to do with IGRA giving us permission to game, but more so the vendors, the consultants, the financiers, all of that stuff.
This is just one arm of the whole thing too. I know they're also looking at municipalization of territories like up north there.
You are saying on either side of the imaginary line, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And of course this gets into eminent domain issues for pipelines, for all kinds of issues. So yes, I'm going to defend tobacco.
Yes.
But I have to, because this is what the state is using to assert authority that they don't have. So my warning to Martin Golden, you're not golden in our book, and I'll tell you, this does have the potential to get ugly. Somebody better use better judgment on this.
I posted that bill on the Facebook page.
Okay, there you go. This isn't the only time we're going to talk about this. In fact, maybe we'll get some folks from the Seneca Nation to weigh in on this. And obviously, I'm going to talk about this in New York. Speaking of New York, Thursday morning from 10 till noon, you can join us there. I am using the Mevo device in New York, even though we're not quite set up for it here. So you can join us on Facebook live stream, but you've got to go to the other group page, which is Let's Talk with John Kane. Oh, I think I share it on my Let's Talk Native page too. Or you can dial us in at www.wbai.org, or if you're in New York City, 99.5 on the FM dial in New York City. That's 10 till noon on Thursday. Hey, look, I'm also showing a film down there. I'm showing Acts of Defiance on Wednesday night, so I got to cram it all in at the end, right? All right, folks. We get going on this stuff. What can we say? We'll see you on Monday here, but in New York next week as well. Yahweh.
Yeah.
Keep going, Yahweh.